Thank you for joining me today. I'm Minda Tracy and I'll be taking you through an action-packed session where I build not one but two dashboards using Power BI. This time I'm wearing my Power BI t-shirt, which you can get from Microsoft's online store. In this webinar, I'm going to use the free Power BI desktop tool to get some data from an Excel file using Power Query, which is built into Power BI desktop. Then I'll use the Power Pivot modeling tools, which are also built into Power BI desktop, to create some additional columns and calculations before creating the dashboards that you see behind me. Now we've got a huge amount to cover, so the pace will be too fast for you to take notes. Instead, I'm going to email you after the webinar ends with a link where you can download the video recording of the webinar and the Power BI desktop file, an Excel workbook containing the data so you can give it a go yourself. Okay, let's crack on because we've got a lot of material to get through, so get comfy. First of all, let's take a look at the data we'll be working with. Here I've got some sales data for two retail chains called Readyware and Bellings. And these chains are based in Australia, and the data spans from January 2016 through to July 2017. On the dim tables sheet, we have some lookup tables that we'll use to group our sales data. For example, in Australia, our financial year runs from July through to June. So I've classified each date into its financial year and its financial quarter and financial year month. I've also got more information on the postcodes so that we can see what suburb and state they relate to. And I've got a table that tells us the buyer for each product category and the manager for each suburb. Now in Excel we'd be inclined to flatten all of this data into one big table so we could analyze it in pivot tables or using formulas, and we'd probably use VLOOKUP to add columns to this fact table. But in Power BI we can use the Power Pivot modeling tools to create relationships between these separate tables, and then we can analyze and visualize all of this data in the one model in Power BI. And this is a much more efficient way to store and work with this data. Now I should also point out that I've formatted all of my data into Excel tables and I've given them each a name that's meaningful, and this will help us when we bring the data into Power BI. We'll be able to easily identify the different tables based on their names. So now that you're familiar with the data, let's bring it into Power BI desktop. So here I've got an empty Power BI desktop file. By the way, the file extension for Power BI desktop is .pbix. And on the Home tab, in the External Data group, we've got our Power Query tools. And this is the same Power Query tool you might be familiar with from Excel, except in Power BI the menu buttons have been collapsed down into just a few. Now I'm going to click on Get Data. And notice that the first option is Excel, which is what I want. But while we're here, I'm going to click on More so I can show you that there's actually a lot more sources we can connect to and get data from. So we've got all our different file types. We can connect to databases, Azure, loads of online services, and then we've got some other services like the web and SharePoint, etc. You can even build Power BI reports using data from multiple sources, and they're adding more connectors all the time. So I'm going to go back to the file group and I'll choose Excel and then Connect. Now we need to browse to our file, and there it is there, so I'll click Open. Now the navigator gives me a list of the tables and sheets in this file, and if I had filtered lists or named ranges or even print ranges, then they'd be listed here too. Remember, I formatted all of my tables into Excel tables and we can see them denoted by this table icon. So I'm going to select each table, and you see on the right I'll get a preview. We can take a closer look at the different data tables before we load them, and if we're happy we can just click Load and that will load it into the Power Pivot model in Power BI desktop. I'm going to edit them first, and we can also take a closer look there. This opens the Power Query window. I'll just bring it into view. And you can see on the left we've got our 5 queries, one for each of our tables that we've brought in from Excel. And if you've used Power Query in Excel, you'll be familiar with this view. It looks a little bit different here just because of the dark theme, but otherwise everything is pretty much the same. The only other difference is this close and apply. In Excel we have close and load, In Power BI we have close and apply, but essentially it's the same button. Now the first thing I want to do is make sure that all the data types are correctly set. And we can tell what the data type is because each column has this icon in the top left. So this is a calendar icon for date. We've got text, whole numbers, and decimal numbers here. So they all look fine. We can have a quick look through each of the different tables and they look fine. So Power Query has done its job and correctly assigned the data types for me. I haven't had to do that. If you did want to change a data type, you simply click on the icon and you can choose a different data type. Or with the column selected, up on the Home tab, we've got the data type up here as well. By the way, it's in this query editor that I do my data cleaning and editing, and I want to reduce the data that I bring into Power BI as much as possible so that I'm not bloating my file with data I'm never going to use. Now the other thing I need to do is add some columns to the sales table to calculate the total sales, because at the moment I've got the sale price and the cost price and the total units, but I don't know the value of what I've sold. So I'm going to add some columns for the total sales and the costs. So up on the Add Column tab, I can go Custom Column. I'll give my column a name and I build my formula. I can simply double click on the field, so it will be sale price times total units, and I'll click OK. We'll do another column for the cost, and again cost price times total units, and OK. Now we'll do one for the gross profit, so custom column, and the gross profit is the sales minus the costs. I'll click OK. So I've got my 3 new columns here. What I want to do is set the data type, because at the moment they're set to any. So on the Home tab I want to set them to decimal number. Okay, you can see on the right Power Query has recorded the steps, so it's got my first custom column, second, third, and then me changing the type. And this is great because when I add new data to that Excel file, I can refresh the query, it will go and get the new data, and it will apply these same steps to that new data. I don't have to repeat this work over and over again. Okay, I think we're good to go. I'll click Close and Apply. Power Query will load the data into the tables in the Power BI model, which is effectively Power Pivot. It's a reasonable amount of data, about just over 70,000 lines of data in the fact table that contains all of our sales information. So it'll take a few seconds initially. Okay, so our data is loaded and we can see in the fields on the right hand side we've got our 5 tables. I can click on the arrow and see the actual fields for those tables as well. Now there's 3 main areas in Power BI Desktop. Currently we're in Report View. We can toggle through the different areas with these icons on the left. So we're in Report View, and this is where we build our visualizations and our charts and tables and that kind of thing. Next we've got our Data View, and this shows us the tables of data. We can toggle through the different tables using the list in the fields. We can see the different columns of data, and we can work with the data modeling side of Power BI in the data table view. And the last one is Relationship View, and this lets us see how our tables of data are related. I'll just make the sales table a bit bigger so we can see it. The connector lines show how the tables are related, so you can see here that the sales and the buyers tables are related through the category fields in each table. We can also see the direction of the relationship based on the arrow, and we can see this is a one to many, the one at this end of the connector line, and the asterisk indicates a many relationship at the sales table end. Now we've got the dates table over here, and it's not related to any tables at the moment. We need to create a relationship between the sales table and the dates table so that we can classify our sales data into our fiscal periods that I set up. So I just need to left click and drag the date field across to the date field in the dates table. Power BI creates the connector for me. Now I've also got this dashed line down here for the regions and sales table relationship, and that indicates that this relationship is inactive. Now in fact I don't need this relationship because I'm I have a relationship through the managers table to the sales table for the regions. So I'm going to just select the connector line and press delete to remove it. And yes, I want to delete that relationship. Now I don't have time to go into detail on relationships now, but I do cover them in my Power BI course. One thing I want to point out here though is even though the fields in the sales table and the dates table, the date field, have the same name, they don't have to have the same names in order to create a relationship. It's more about the data in those columns being related, and the dimension table, in this case the dates table, should not contain any duplicate dates in the date column. So one side of the relationship must contain just a unique list, and that's why we have the one at this end of the connector line versus the many. So in my sales table I have many dates that are the same because I've got lots of transactions, so that makes sense. The fact tables tend to have the many or the duplicates in one column, whereas the dimension tables have the unique list. Okay, let's move on because we've got a lot to cover. Now one last thing we need to do is notice the sigma signs beside these fields. This indicates that Power BI will attempt to aggregate these fields, and that would be the correct treatment because these are value fields, fields that we would want to add up or average or find the minimum or maximum for. Down here in the regions table, we've got the postcode field. Now we don't want to summarize that, and nor do we want to summarize the financial year month. So we need to fix those fields so that Power BI doesn't try to aggregate them when we use them in our visualizations. So let's fix the regions table. I'll go to Data View. I'll select the table from my list, select postcode, and then on the modeling tab over here, instead of the default summarization being sum, I'm going to choose do not summarize. Now we had the same thing in the financial month, and I'll choose that table, select the column, change it to do not summarize. If we take a peek back at the relationship view, we can now see the sigma signs are gone from those fields. So that's exactly what we want. One more thing I want to do in the table view is just apply some formatting to some of these fields. So for example, my gross profit, cost and sales, I need to format them so that when I use them in my visualizations, they're formatted as I'd expect. So to select each column, choose the format. I'm going to format them with the currency, and we'll make it 0 decimal places because these are going to be quite large numbers. I don't need to see the decimal places. Okay, another thing we need to do is help Power BI identify which fields in our model relate to places or postcodes or countries and that kind of thing. So I'm going to select the postcode field, and up here in the data category I'm going to choose postal code, and I'm going to repeat that for the regions table so that Power BI knows what to do with these different columns when I start to use them in my maps. So we'll call this a place, and the state will be a state or province. Okay, now I think we're ready to start building our visualizations. Let's go to the report view. The first report I'm going to build is a summary aimed at the overall picture of the business units and how they're performing. Now the first visualization I want to look at is a KPI, and it's this icon here. And I want to look at the sales figures, and we'll look at them over time. So the trend axis will be the date field, and I can use the pull handles to resize it. Now the area chart that you see in the background represents the trend of sales over time for the entire period of dates that are contained within this file. And the figure that we can see, 2.4 million, is the sales for the last month. So I'm just going to format this. So on the Paint Roller tab, I'm going to change the display to millions. And now we have our first visualization. It's just a high-level figure. So the next thing I want to look at is a chart that shows me my sales by state, broken down by chain. So we'll look at a clustered column chart. I just selected, I can move it around. I'm going to pop it up here. So the fields that I want in this are my sales, and I want to look at it by region. So I'll look at it by state. And I also want to see it broken down by chain. You can see as I'm selecting these fields that it's making a guess at the well that it should put them in. So it knows that sales are a value, so it puts them in the value field to add them up. It knows that state is a category, so it's assuming I want that in my axis. Now I also want to see the chain, so I'm going to drag that into the legend field. And now I can see my sales by chain broken down across the different states. Now I want to change the color format for this, so I'm going to go to the Format tab and then Data Colors, and we're going to go with a theme where Bellings is in grey and Readyware is in yellow. Okay, the next visualization I want to look at is my sales and gross margin by financial year quarters. So we'll add another cluster column chart, and I want my sales and I want my gross profit and my financial year quarters. You can see I haven't had to tell it where to put this data. I've just put it into, I just selected the fields and it's put them in the right place for me. Now actually I think it would look better if the gross profit was a line chart. So let's change the visualization. And now we have to tell it which series to put on the line. So I want my gross profit in my line values. And I want to add data labels to this. Let's turn the labels on and we'll get rid of the y-axis. Since we've got labels, we don't need the y-axis as well, it's just duplication. Now I might also change the format for my labels, so I've got 1 decimal place, and we'll leave it at millions. Alright, what next? Oh, I want to see the breakdown of sales by chain, just the total breakdown. So I'm going to use a pie chart. Now, for most people who know me, I rarely ever use pie charts, in fact pretty much never. But when there's just 2 series, it's okay to use a pie chart. So we'll change the colors for this as well to be consistent with our theme. Okay, let's get our pie chart. I also want to look at the data on a map. I want to get an idea of how the different states are performing visually on a map. So we'll use the globe map visualization, and I'll look at sales and we'll look at state. Let's see how we go with that. It's taking a little bit. The maps use the Bing mapping engine. Okay, so right away I can see a problem. It thinks that some of my states are up in North America and Canada. So the reason it's doing that is because my state information is ambiguous. It's not classified into a country. So I can fix that ambiguity. I'll go back to the Data tab, and on my regions table, which I'm on, I'm going to add a column that concatenates the state and the country. So we'll add a new column. And here we're using the Power Pivot model. So if you've used Power Pivot before, this is similar. So we'll call it State Country. And we'll use the state field. So I'm just arrowing through the fields. And we use the ampersand just like in Excel. We're going to concatenate some text. And I'll press Enter. It populates the column for me. Now I need to give it a category so that the map knows to use it. So click off and click on to select it again. So here we're going to go state or province. We'll go back to our visualizations and we'll remove the state field and we'll use this new state country field. Okay, that's much better. Now actually I think I'd like to see it as a filled map instead of the bubbles. Okay, so with the filled map, the higher intensity of the color indicates the higher values. And you can see when I hover over it, I get a nice tooltip for the different state information. All right. Next, I want to look at sales by category and chain. So again, a bar chart would be good because the category names can be quite long. So we'll look at category and sales, and we'll break it down by chain. So again, we're looking at our data for the different chains. So I want to be consistent with my colors, so we'll format them. And yellow. And I'd like to sort this so that the largest category is first. At the moment it's just sorted alphabetically, so I can click the ellipsis and then sort by sales. Okay, so we can see men's is the highest seller. Alright, the last visualization I'm going to put in here is going to be a bubble chart that looks at our sales and gross profit by category across time. So we'll click on the bubble chart, which is the same icon for scatter chart. We'll make it the full area. So in here we'll start with sales. It's going to go on our x-axis, that's correct. I want the category for my legend. I'm going to drag them in here so I get them in the right place. I want a measure here. Instead of a calculator column, I want to use a measure. So we're going to, up on the modeling tab, new measure. And again, this is like Power Pivot if you've used that before. So look at the gross profit percentage. So in order to calculate this, we need to know the sum of the gross profit divided by the sum of the sales. And you can see I'm just typing in the start of the table and field name, and then I get this list which I can arrow up and down through. And it uses the same structured reference style that we have with Excel tables. Okay, so that's my formula. I'm going to press enter. Now it's been added to the buyers table. So I'll select the field, and then up here, home table, I'll change that to sales. And while I'm here, I'll give it a format so that when we use it in our visualizations, it doesn't look silly. So we'll see how one decimal place of our percentage format looks. Now I want to use this field, and you can actually tell before I do use it that it's a measure because it has the calculator icon beside it, whereas the other value fields have the sigma sign. So this is an explicit measure, and these ones down here are implicit measures. So if you're familiar with Power Pivot, you'll know what implicit and explicit is, but that's the indicator for an explicit measure, one that we've written ourselves using DAX formulas. And that's what this is up here, a DAX formula. It looks a lot like Excel, and that's one of the great things about DAX, it is a lot like Excel. So I'm going to drag my GP into my, oops, I need to make sure my visualization is selected. So I'll drag it into my y-axis, and we'll use our gross profit for the size of our bubbles. So now we have this bubble chart, and if I hover over the different bubbles, I get a tooltip which tells me all of the information related to that bubble. Now there's one more thing I can do here. With these bubble charts in Power BI, we have the option to have a play axis. So it can actually look at this data over time. I want to look at it by financial quarter, so I'm going to drag that down into the play axis. And now I can click this play button, and you'll see how the data changes over time. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so we've built our first dashboard. Actually, there's one last thing I want to add, and that's a slicer. Let's add the slicer icon here. I'll just drag it up into the corner. I want to be able to filter by state, so I'm going to add the state field to my slicer, and I'm going to just format it a little bit so that its orientation is horizontal, and we'll just make it a bit smaller, and we'll make the font smaller as well so that it squeezes in there. Now you notice that I have a blank in my slicer. Now that indicates that there's a blank state field in my dataset. Now I know there's not, I don't know why it's doing this, but I have a solution for it. So, and that is, I'm going to go to the field list, I'm going to add a filter at the report level for the state, and I'm going to filter out that blank. So I'll select all, and then I'll deselect blank, and now it's gone from my slicer. And this filter will apply to every sheet that I add to this Power BI file, so I won't have to do that again. Alright, so we can fiddle about getting our formatting just how we want, and I won't spend too much time on that because I want to move on to the next dashboard. But before we do that, I want to show you some of the cool things that we can do now that we've created these visualizations. You're familiar with slicers, I'm sure, from Excel. So we can click on the different states and you'll see everything in this dashboard filters accordingly. But what's even cooler is that we can click on different elements in the charts and we get this cross-filtering and highlighting effect. As I click on a different item, the previous filter gets removed and then the next one is applied. So I can look at just menswear for the chain readywear. If I click on it again, my charts and visualizations all revert back to unfiltered. When we use a slicer, we can filter, and those filters are additive. So I can have multiple filters and I can keep filtering and filtering and filtering. However, with the cross-filtering and highlighting that you apply by clicking on different elements in your visualizations, they're not additive. You click one, it cross-filters or highlights, and then you click the next one and it applies a different filter or highlighting. So it's just something to bear in mind. I can remove all of my selections in my slicer by clicking the eraser symbol. Okay, I'm going to give my page a name. Double click on it to give it a new name. I'm going to add a new sheet and we'll crack on with the next visualization, which looks at regions and chains. So the first visualization I want here is sales by buyer. So I use the clustered bar chart. It's going to go down in this bottom corner. So I want the sales and I want the buyer's name. Okay. Next, I'm going to look at our data on a map by chain. So I'm going to use the globe map and I want the sales and the chain. Now for this map, I want to look at it by postcode. And again, we have some problems because you can see there's dots in New Zealand and North America. So again, we've got the ambiguity problem that we had previously. So let's go back to our data table for our regions, and we're going to add another column. And this one's going to be our postcode, our suburb, and our state. So we'll give it a name. Actually, it'll be country, not state. So I want my regions table and I want the postcode field, and I need a comma and a space. So just like Excel, I can concatenate using the ampersand sign and put my text inside double quotes. So I want the postcode and then I want the suburb. So again, on the regions table, I'll have the suburb. I just tab to accept it, and then I just need to add Australia. And I'll press enter. I'll just deselect it and then select it again so I can categorize it. And this will be postcode. We'll go back to our visualizations. Now the reason, by the way, that I put the suburb name in there is so that when we look at the data and we hover our mouse over it, the tooltip gives us not just the postcode and Australia, it actually tells us the name of the suburb, which I think is a bit more useful. So we need to format this so that our data colors are consistent. And we'll make it yellow. Okay. The next visualization I want to look at is the sales and gross profit by state and manager. So let's look at another bar chart. And this will be quite large, so I'm going to take up all this space here. So I want sales. I'll look at gross profit percent. I'll put that in a moment. I want to show you how it's going to work. So we'll look at it by manager. And we'll look at it by state. So when I drag the state into the chart, it's automatically summarized it by state. But now I have these icons up here that allow me to drill down. Let me go into focus mode, and that just opens the visualization on its own page. And I'll click the joined double down arrow, And now we've drilled down so that we have all the states and then the manager within that state. So that's more what I want. So let's go back to the report and make it a little bit wider. Now one more thing I can do here is I can add some color saturation for the gross profit percent, so get an idea of how each manager is performing. So we can see here Lillian from New South Wales, her gross profit is quite high compared to John, and we can hover our mouse over and we get the tooltip which tells me her actual GP, and the darker the color the higher the GP, and we can make changes to those settings in here, but that's the default and that actually works quite well for what I want. So I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller. We'll move on and add some more visualizations. The next one I want is an area chart to show me sales over time for the different chains. So we'll look at sales and we use the date field, and I want the chains for my legend, so move that into legend. Okay. I'm going to drill down a level. That's better now, I've got it by month. And we'll change the colors so that we're consistent with the theme. Oops. Okay. Actually, I'm going to remove this date field and I'm going to use the date field from the fact table. Okay, that gives me a better indication of the pattern or trend of the data over time. Okay, next we need a column chart that shows us the breakdown. Actually, you know what? I'm going to copy this chart because it's relevant. So just Control C to copy, Control V to paste it in because it's relevant for this view of the data as well. So I'll pop it in there. Now I want to add some slicers for this report. So I'll click on the slicer icon. I want to be able to slice by chain. We'll pop that up in the top left, putting them into a location in my dashboard that makes sense for the user. So it's one of the first things that they come across in the top. They start filtering by chain. I also want to add some key information. So I'm going to use this multi-row card and that will slot in here. So what I want to do is just show high level sales, gross profit and gross profit percent. And I'll resize this so that it formats it the way I want. Okay. I'm also going to add a slicer for the states because this report is all about looking at the data by regions and chain. So it makes sense to have a slicer by state. Now the other thing I want to do is use a custom visualization. So I can choose from all of these visualizations, but I can also get custom visuals. And I'll import one. I've already downloaded one. I can't go into detail on how to do that in this webinar because I just don't have time, but I've got some custom visuals that I've already downloaded, and one is a spark line, so I'm going to use that. I do cover this in detail in my course. I'm just waiting for it to load the spark line. I'll click OK, and now it'll appear up here. There it is. So I'm going to add the spark line. So this I want sales by date, and I want to look at it by state. So I'm just going to align it quite close to the slicer, and I'm going to try and get it very similar to the slicer list so that they almost look related. Well, they are related, but a bit more closely related. Okay, so we can mess around trying to format everything just as we want. Now, when I filter by state, you'll see the map over here zooms in to show me just Queensland. I've selected Queensland. My spark line's filtered just for Queensland. I can see just the Queensland managers, and all of my charts and visualizations are filtered. I can remove all the filters. I can also do things like select New South Wales Readyware, and now my map over here is zoomed in and we can see that just the Readyware locations are highlighted. I can hover over the dots to get an idea of which suburb that is. I'll click on that again to remove the filtering. If I want to see Lillian's data, I can click on this bar, and now I can see these are Lillian's stores, and I can see all of Lillian's performance in each of the visualizations. And I'll click it again to remove the formatting. I can also collapse down these and see it a bit better. One of the things I do want to point out is if we had area managers, say we had a manager for New South Wales, Queensland and so on, I can actually use what's called row level security, and I can set up roles in my database and assign different managers to those roles, and then those managers will only see the data that they're entitled to see. So I could set up a filter that only shows Queensland data, so only the manager who's assigned to that role for Queensland will see the Queensland data, and all of these visualizations get automatically filtered for them. I don't have to create multiple reports and delete data. Power BI can filter that automatically based on the role and who's assigned to that role. So I think that's an amazing feature, particularly for reports like this where you want to distribute it to specific users but not have to create 6 or 7 different reports for each manager. Now another thing Power BI can do is get updates from your data. So if I look at our Excel file, I've got this sheet here called org data. So at the moment the data in Power BI goes up to July 2017. There's the end of the table, 71,971 rows. Here I've got my August data, so let's just pretend, obviously this isn't the real world, but let's just pretend this is our August data and it's just been added to this table, so I'm going to paste it in. We can see the table's now expanded to incorporate the new data. We've got 76,000 lines, includes August. I'll just save the file and then we'll go back to Power BI, and I'm going to refresh the Power BI connection. So on the Home tab, I'm going to click refresh. Now I want you to look down here because this is currently only displaying data up to July, and our total sales is 54 million. When I click refresh, it's going to go away and get the new data, and every visualization in this file is going to update to incorporate that new data. I haven't had to make any changes to anything, it's just going to automatically incorporate it. And there we go. So now the data points go to the 1st of August. And that's the date. I've just got all of my data on the 1st of each month. So it says the 1st of August, but that includes August data. If we look at the summary, we can see now it's 3.18 million. That's August's data. That's the total for August. If I press the play button, it'll go through to the same quarter, but we'll have new data in the file. So you can see the dots end in a slightly different position. And we can see here our sales for Q1 2018 have also increased. Remember, our financial year in Australia is from July through to June, so August falls into the 2018 financial year, the first quarter of that financial year. So once you set up your reports in Power BI, all you have to do is refresh the connection to the data and it picks up all that new information. The queries have applied all the same steps that we'd set up when we added our extra columns for the sales and costs and our gross profit. I haven't had to do any more. So it's really a low maintenance solution. Once you get it up and running, it's easy to keep up to date. So now that we've built these amazing dashboards, you'll want to share them with your colleagues. And one way is to simply share the Power BI desktop file in the same way you might share an Excel file. For example, you can email it or put it on a shared network drive where others can access it. Anyone who wants to open this file will also need Power BI Desktop installed. Now, while that's one way to share your Power BI reports, it's not really the way it was intended, because when you send someone your Power BI Desktop file, they have access to all of your data and they can make changes to your file. In other words, there's no security. You can't even protect the pages like you can with an Excel workbook. So the better way to share your reports is via the Power BI service. And to do this, we need to be logged into our Power BI account in Power BI Desktop. And you can see I'm logged in, there's my name up there. And then all we do is on the Home tab, we click Publish. I select the workspace that I want to publish it in and click Select. I'll cover more on workspaces in my online Power BI course. I can't go into everything in this webinar, there's just not enough time. Now this might take a few minutes depending on the size of your file and the speed of your internet connection. Once it's ready to go, you'll get a notification and you can click on that link to open Power BI in your browser. So what's happening here is Power BI is publishing this file and all of the data up to the cloud in the Power BI online service. Okay, so we're ready to go. I can click on the link here to open it in powerbi.com. Here we are in powerbi.com. You can see the new data set is here and we've got yellow asterisks beside the new items, so it's easy to tell which one it is. If I click on the report, you'll see the report looks exactly the same as it did in Power BI Desktop. I've got my two separate pages down here. I can toggle between them. I can interact with the report in exactly the same way. Everything you see is the same. I can navigate between the report view and the dataset view. From the dataset view, I can build further visualizations. I've got all my tables here and my fields, and I can further analyze the data. However, there are good reasons why you shouldn't do this when your report comes from a Power BI desktop file, which I cover in my course. So back in the report view, from here we can print. From the File tab, we can print, publish to web, we can even export it to PowerPoint. If we want to share the reports with colleagues so they can view them in their version of Power BI in a secure environment, then we can pin this live page, which is everything on this page, to a dashboard. And the pinned dashboard has the same interactive functionality we had in the report view, but the added bonus is we can then easily share it with our colleagues who also have a Power BI account. So we'll give our dashboard a name. Retail analysis. I'm going to pin live, and that will maintain the connection between the dataset and the dashboard, and that way if the data updates, it will be reflected in this dashboard here. So the dashboard works in a similar way. We can still click on it and interact to filter. We can use the slicers. Everything works. But the added bonus here is now I can easily share it. I can click the share icon and I can grant access to my colleagues. Simply enter their email address and a message if I want, and they will be sent an invitation to view my dashboard. And if they're part of my organization, then it will also appear in their list of reports and they can navigate to it from there. And this means our data is secure. Only the person you share the dashboard with can view the dashboard, and they must be logged into Power BI to see it. Now there are loads of rules with regards to sharing and options for restricting what data people have access to. I just don't have time to cover them in this webinar, but I do cover them extensively in my online Power BI course. One thing I should point out is recipients who you share your dashboards with have access to the same data and reports and workbooks that you used to build this dashboard. The difference is they can't save any changes that they might make to the filters and that type of thing when they're looking and reviewing the dashboards that you shared with them. Now there's another cool feature I want to show you that's only available in the Power BI service, and the first one is called Quick Insights. Now, Quick Insights runs a sophisticated algorithm against your dataset to find potentially interesting insights that you might not have discovered yourself. It's great if you're not familiar with the data or you want to discover trends or outliers or correlations that you might have missed. To generate Quick Insights, we click on the ellipsis beside the dataset and then Quick Insights. It'll take a little while to go through your dataset, and when it's ready to go, you'll get a notification up there here in the top right. So you can see it's searching for insights now. What we'll get is a series of visualizations for outliers and trends, correlations. Not all of them will make sense, but we can help Power BI do a better job by naming our fields appropriately. So here we are with the insights. You can see as I scroll down, there's a whole load of different visualizations, and it's found things like, for example here, the GP percent for Tasmania, the state Tasmania in Australia, has outliers. So I can pin this to my dashboard, or I can go into focus mode. And from here I can alter filters, and I can get further insights on this particular data set, this filtered view of my data. So that's a really quick overview of quick insights. I'll go back. Once it's generated the insights, they're there and we can access them again from the View Insights menu. Now the next thing I want to show you is Q&A. And Q&A is available from the dashboard view. And basically Q&A allows you to use natural language to ask a question of your data. As you type, you'll see fields from your dataset appear and you can select them or keep typing. So I've just typed in sales by chain and you can see Power BI has generated this bar chart for me. I've literally typed in 3 words and I've got myself a bar chart. I don't even need to know how to create a visualization. And from here I can pin this visual, I can expand the visualizations and fields panes, and I can further modify what I see here, or I can keep typing to zoom in further on the data. So Q&A allows you to get quick answers to your questions without having to understand the model structure or even how to build visualizations. And there's no question that Power BI is an amazing tool. And just to be clear, everything I've shown you today has been done with the free Power BI tools available. It's really amazing how much we can get for nothing. Now before we wrap up, there are some things I want to point out and reiterate. This dashboard is connected to the Power BI desktop file I built. If I refresh the Power BI desktop file, let's just go and have a look at it. Oops. If I click refresh and I get new data, then there are a few different ways to update the Power BI service view of the data, but the point I want to make here is I can refresh this, and then anyone I've shared my dashboard with will have the latest information. I go into more detail on how all the intricacies of refreshing works in my course. Now the visualizations and the related data set have been published to the Power BI service. It's a secure service, but having your data in the cloud might be an issue for some companies, so I cover the alternatives in my course. When you share a dashboard, those you share it with have access to the same reports and underlying data, but they can't save any changes unless you allow them to. And this access to the underlying data allows them to dig into the data and find answers to their own questions. For example, you saw me type in questions in Q&A and I was able to dig down into the data. People you share the dashboard with can also do that, although you can turn Q&A off. But again, I'll cover that in my course. If you wanted to restrict access to data based on a user's role, for example, you want each regional manager only to see their region, then you need to use row-level security. Now I cover row-level security in detail in my course as well. The other thing to bear in mind for Excel users is that the same Power Query and Power Pivot tools we have in Excel are used in Power BI Desktop. So if you already know these tools, then you're off to a head start. But if you're one of the millions of users who have a version of Excel that's not compatible with these tools, then you don't have to miss out anymore because they come with this free Power BI Desktop application. So now you can get Power Query and Power Pivot skills up to speed, and when your company eventually upgrades your version of Excel, you'll be way ahead of the curve. Well, I hope you enjoyed my webinar. In under 1 hour, I've built 2 hugely sophisticated dashboards, published them to the Power BI service. I use Quick Insights to check for outliers or interesting facts about my data. I use Q&A to ask a question, and had Power BI create a visualization for me without me even needing to know how to build a chart. Now I'm sure you'll agree it's truly amazing. Now I've really only touched the surface of what Power BI can do and how to use it. For example, I didn't really need to use the Power Query or Power Pivot tools much in this example, and that's because my data was already clean and ready to use for the most part. But for most of us, this is rarely the case. I mean, how often do you find yourself loading data into Excel and being able to dive straight into analysing it in a pivot table? Not very often, I'll bet. So typically we need to clean up our data, maybe merge data from multiple sources and add some calculations to it before we can even start the analysis phase. So we can break Power BI down into three main components that you need to master. They're Power Query to get and clean your data, Power Pivot to model it, and then finally the Power BI visualizations. Now it's clear that Power BI is a broad tool with lots of functionality to navigate, and if you get some things wrong when you're setting up your model and reports, then it can be really difficult to undo them. There are loads of settings to control who can see what and other fine-tuning that can be applied, which is why I put together a course for Power BI. So if you want to get up to speed with Power BI quickly and follow a logical process for learning all about it, including the Power Query and Power Pivot tools, then I recommend you take a few minutes to check out my online Power BI course. So what's next? Well, go ahead and download Power BI. The desktop application is free and I've included a link on where to get it in the description below. And to help you get started, I've also included links to where you can download the Power BI desktop file and data used in this video so you can go and practice yourself. The download link will take you to this resource page, and if you scroll down you'll see there's a link here for the Power BI desktop files. Just click the orange icon to start the download. And from our website, under the pricing menu, you can find more information about my Power BI course. Now if you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to give it the thumbs up and share it with your friends and colleagues, and while you're here, please subscribe to my channel. Well, that's it from me and Power BI for now. I hope you're as excited about this amazing tool as I am. If you have any questions, be sure to email me at website@myonlinetraininghub.com. Thanks for your time.